All right, so welcome to the Manistee Conservation District quarterly watershed meetings. Following the agenda. So as we transition into our busier spring season and summer season, and our watershed projects and planning continues, we wanted to bring in a timely resource to speak to you on the topic of watershed management planning. So our speaker is Teresa Sherwood, an environmental quality analyst with Michigan EGLE. So Teresa covers Manistee County and will give us a what, why, where, when, and how style presentation with plenty of time for questions afterwards. So we'll hand it over to Teresa.
Thanks, Chelsea. I'm calling you from a cold presentation or conference room in Gaylord. So that's why I didn't have time to get with you before the meeting, because I was dealing with some heating and cooling issues here. So
all good.
Hopefully when I started sharing my screen, it will work flawlessly, since we didn't have a chance to practice ahead of time. So let me see if I can get that going. Okay. Everyone see that? Is that working?
That looks good.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, well, good morning, everybody, and thank you all for taking the time to be here today. My name is Teresa Sherwood, and I work for the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, also known as EGLE, in our Water Resources Division. I'm based out of our Gaylord office, and my work covers the 22 counties in the northern Lower Peninsula that both of our Gaylord and Cadillac district offices cover. So today I'll be presenting an overview of watershed management and planning in Michigan. First, I'd like to begin with some basic information, including a summary of EGLE's non-point source program. First, our central staff, who are based out of Lansing, serve as statewide program coordinators. They oversee the development of standards and specifications for best management practices, coordinate non-point source efforts at the state level with other federal and state agencies, and provide statewide education and outreach, as well as they serve as the grant project administrators for grants awarded by the non-point source program. Field staff, like me, provide technical assistance at the local level. We are familiar with our region, its watersheds and water bodies, local organizations, as well as local water quality issues. We connect organizations and individuals working on non-point source and watershed management issues with non-point source central staff and other resources. We also help provide guidance to grant applicants and grantees, provide oversight and assistance in watershed planning and implementation projects, and head up review of watershed management plans that are ready to be approved. So what is non-point source pollution? Unlike pollution from industrial facilities or sewage treatment plants, non-point source pollution comes from many diffuse sources. For the most part, it is caused when pollutants are carried from the land and deposited into our waterways, but atmospheric deposition from air pollution is also a cause of non-point source pollution. I meant to warn you all ahead of time that I do have some interactive points in this presentation, so that it's not just me talking to you the whole time. So this is our first opportunity for a little bit of interaction. So I was hoping that everyone could maybe chime in and provide a name or two of some common types of non-point source pollutants. And I think, Chelsea, do you want people, is it easier if they put it in the chat, or?
Yeah, if you guys just want to put your
Great.
answers in the chat and I'll monitor that, that would be great.
So we're looking for some types of non-point source pollutants.
Jeff from Bear Lake.
Yeah.
Hey, Chelsea's familiar with this. We've got water and pollutants coming in from the village of Bear Lake, and we're monitoring that. So I'm calling that non-point source pollution.
Okay.
From storm drains.
From storm drains. So Yes, a lot of non-point source pollutants enter our waterways through storm drains. So I'll give an example. One that is pretty common would be sediment. So the actual pollutants are what we're looking for in this little exercise. But yes, Jeff, a lot of these things that we might list off can be carried by stormwater.
Yeah, we're getting several different pollutants that are coming in. So,
Yeah.
okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Do we have any other ideas? And I stump you guys.
Well, there's also failing septic fields.
Yeah, so a couple of things that would come, pollutants that would come from failing septics might include bacteria or nutrients is a big one as well.
Phosphorus.
Yes.
Yep, and Arma said road salt.
Yes. That's another one. Yeah, and so a couple others would be like petroleum products like oil and gas. There's a couple pictures here that show that. I actually took that middle picture at the Meyer parking lot here in Gaylord. Somebody had already left the parking spot. Apparently they were leaking some stuff that day. And then also another one would be like chemicals or toxins. I mentioned atmospheric deposition being a means for non-point source pollution, making it to our waterways. And so that would, maybe be something like mercury. Great. So these pollutants have harmful effects on drinking water supplies, recreation, fisheries, and wildlife. And non-point source pollution is the leading remaining cause of water quality problems in the United States. So real quick, watershed is an area of land that drains to a common water body or waterway. Watersheds can range from small scale to large scale. So wetlands drain to streams, streams drain to rivers or lakes, lakes and rivers drain to larger rivers, and in Michigan, everything eventually drains to the Great Lakes. So it is important to know that everything that happens on land impacts water bodies within the watershed, and non-point source pollution comes from somewhere within the watershed. In this graphic here I have in the slide, that is the larger Manistee River watershed. Excuse me. A watershed management plan is a comprehensive plan designed to address water quality problems by identifying water quality threats and/or impairments, the causes and sources of non-point source pollution, and provides pollutant load estimates. The plan provides strategies to address water quality problems by outlining water quality improvement and protection goals, information and education goals, identifying tasks to achieve those goals, and it includes a monitoring and evaluation component to evaluate the effectiveness of completed tasks. So what are some of the reasons why you would develop a watershed management plan? One is to protect and restore designated uses. I will talk about designated uses a little bit more with the next slide. Another reason is that we want to have more impactful improvement and protection efforts. So once we know what's really going on within the watershed, we can get the best bang for our buck, if you will, when implementing tasks to address water quality problems and threats. A plan also helps with developing proactive and long-term solutions to water quality issues, rather than just putting Band-Aids on issues. For example, if you know that phosphorus is leading to excessive aquatic plant growth and affecting uses such as swimming, fishing, and navigation, rather than killing the plants with chemical or mechanical treatments year after year, you can develop an approach to reduce the amount of phosphorus entering the water body in the first place by doing things like installing green stormwater infrastructure or shoreline green belts. A watershed plan also helps to build partnerships to identify and achieve common goals and build support for water quality improvement and protection efforts. Everyone lives in the watershed, in a watershed, I should say, and everyone needs clean water. So a watershed plan gets everyone on the same page about water quality issues and what can be done about them. regardless of where they live, work, or play within the watershed. Also, having a watershed plan in place will help to leverage funding for projects that can restore and protect water quality. While an EPA and EGLE approved plan is required to apply for the major source of implementation funds through EGLE's non-point source program, many other funders rely on knowing that there is a plan in place and that there will be measurable improvements achieved when their dollars are used to fund projects. For example, you can apply for funding to install a rain garden because you think it will look nice and it will help to educate the community, which is great. Those are great things. But if you have a watershed plan that helps you determine the best location to place a rain garden in order to maximize the amount of stormwater that it will intercept and infiltrate, and you can calculate the pollutant load reductions that will result from that project, you're more likely to get funding to install that rain garden. So quick here on designated uses. I'm not going to read off each of them, but you will see that or recognize that these uses are important to all of us. Whether or not a water body is able to provide its designated uses relates to water quality standards that are set to protect those uses, which can either be numeric or narrative. For all of the standards, they all have narrative or all of the designated uses have related narrative water quality standards, whether or not they have a numeric standard or not. And these narrative standards are related to physical conditions such as turbidity, oil films, foams, or suspended solids. And then some of the designated uses, such as total body contact recreation, have numeric standards for certain pollutants or indicators such as E. coli. And I'd just like to point out that that's me in the picture at the top right, catching my very first bluegill with a fly rod. And if you've not caught bluegill or other panfish with a fly rod on a lake, it's super fun. It was tiny, but it was my first one, so I had to get a picture before I threw it back in the water. So just want to make sure you guys know. Little tidbit there. It's a fun thing to do. So how to develop a watershed plan? There's some major steps that are in the guidance for developing a watershed plan, including building partnerships, characterizing the watershed, setting goals and identifying solutions, designing an implementation program, implementing the plan, and then measuring progress and making adjustments. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through each of these steps in detail, but I'm going to detail a few of the steps in the following slides. So who should be involved in the watershed planning and implementation process? In general, the participants you want to consider are those who are responsible for implementing the plan, are affected by implementation of the plan, can provide information on issues and concerns in the watershed, have knowledge of existing programs or plans that you might want to integrate into the plan, and those who can provide technical and financial assistance in developing and implementing the plan. So I intentionally left some key partners and stakeholders out of this list. I give a few examples, such as watershed councils, land conservancies, citizen groups, lake associations, state and federal agencies, and community foundations. But here's another opportunity for you to chime in and for some interaction here. Can you all help name off some other organizations or key stakeholders that you think would or should be involved in watershed planning?
All right, Andrea in the chat said NGOs and tribes.
Yes, perfect.
And then Renee says, what about local government?
Yes, perfect.
Yep, county, township, villages, and then Arma said conservation districts.
Yes. I very purposely left that one out. No, because I knew somebody would bring that up. So, okay. Any others? Okay, so some others that, we've got a couple of groups here that are more associated with rivers. So not just lake associations, but also more river focused organizations. or friends groups, angler groups, and then also I think the other one I was thinking of that I didn't list here was local businesses or business organizations. So pretty wide variety. And with local governments, a lot of times, we see different, we might have like a drain commissioner or maybe the road commission. There might be specific folks or roles within the local governments that are maybe more involved in watershed management. So to begin characterizing the watershed, you will first determine the watershed area to be covered by the plan. I'm going to discuss this a little bit more in some upcoming slides. But once the area to be covered by the plan has been determined, it's time to get to work on the data. So gathering data, collecting more data, and analyzing data is usually the most labor-intensive part of developing a plan, but is crucial. You must have this information to be able to identify the issues and critical areas to be addressed by the plan. Data collection may include a lot of different parameters. In the top left two pictures, this is EGLE staff doing macroinvertebrate analysis, which is also commonly done by volunteer groups throughout Michigan. So macroinvertebrates help provide an indication of overall water quality. Other parameters that might be collected as part of your data to characterize the watershed would include parameters such as temperature, nutrients, turbidity, dissolved oxygen. And there's definitely some others too, depending on what's going on in your watershed. So this data may be gathered from ongoing efforts by organizations and programs such as EGLE surface water monitoring, volunteer lake and stream monitoring, DNR fish reports, tribal water quality monitoring programs, or monitoring done by other by nonprofit organizations. Additional monitoring needed to develop the plan should be identified before and or during the planning process and should be collected as you're developing the plan to the greatest extent possible. New and continuous monitoring efforts can also be identified as a goal of the watershed plan. Additional data to be collected includes land use inventories such as land cover or shoreline conditions. Often you would conduct inventories of road stream crossing sites or maybe stream bank erosion. Other inventories can include an analysis, so not just physical characteristics of the watershed, but things like analysis of local ordinances. And very commonly, you would have a social indicator survey conducted. So these, all of these inventories, along with the water quality data, all become a part of your characterization of the watershed. So this is our last little interactive activity in the presentation here. So we're going to talk a little bit about pollutants, causes, and sources. So pollutants, we listed some off earlier, are the materials that are harmful to water quality. Causes are the actions that result in the pollutants entering the waterways. And sources are the locations where the pollutants originate from. So for example, you see here, nutrients are the pollutant. The potential cause of nutrients entering or polluting a waterway is the action of excessive fertilizer application. And the sources where the excessive fertilizer applications could be occurring include residential lawns, golf courses, and agricultural fields. So I'd like to go through and we'll name it, we'll have the pollutant, the cause, and then have you help identify some potential sources. So where are these things happening and the pollutants coming from? So the second one I've got on the list here is sediment, and the cause being erosion and sedimentation. So can any of you help determine some of the locations or sources from where sediment would be coming from and erosion and sedimentation occurring?
All right, Jack said stream banks.
Yes.
Zach said road stream crossings.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, a couple others, I would say on construction site.
Nice.
And the other one I had on my list included shorelines that don't have any buffers.
Yeah.
Okay, any others for sediment? Before I move on?
I don't know if this would match or not, but I read an article last month about, believe it or not, when people turn corners on roads, a lot of rubber is left and it somehow goes into a storm drain. I don't know if you'd want to call that or not, but it was an interesting article about,
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, Jeff, I've been reading some more about that or learning more about that. And I think we're just getting started in investigating that. I know that, so this is a little, from our little exercise here, but yeah, so that material would be considered a pollutant. And so then the cause would be, it rubbing off the tires, but and then, it would come from the roads, obviously. But another thing that I read about and that's being investigated, and I don't think they've really found it necessarily to be an issue yet through monitoring, but I think more monitoring needs to be done, is you actually using, if I understand it right, and maybe somebody else is familiar with this, ground up tire materials to use for road surfacing. So I think that's another issue that's being investigated. So those are the things that we tend to categorize as like emerging pollutants that we think there's probably an issue, or we're starting to know that there's an issue, but a lot more needs to be learned about it. So that's definitely a good one, an interesting one and something to follow. So let's see, the next one I had listed was bacteria as the pollutant, and the cause being human or animal water waste runoff or seepage. So can anybody help us think of some potential sources where this waste runoff or seepage would be coming from?
All right, Arma said septic systems.
Yes.
Andrea added farm fields, and Zach added CAFOs.
So that is, yes, CAFOs, concentrated animal feed operations. Yes, so kind of like the excessive fertilizer application, but excessive manure application could definitely be a source. So that would be like from your fields and your land application of manure from CAFOs. A couple others, actually we're finding out more about from waste from animals that are hanging out on shorelines, like geese and seagulls, and even dogs. And also, so, when that waste from those animals is not cleaned up and runs off into the waterways. And then also another very common one that we try to address, and I know so probably a few people in this group try to work on, is livestock in streams. So basically livestock having, just free reign access to streams. So that's another kind of another big one, I think. And lastly, we have oil and gas as a pollutant, and stormwater runoff being a cause for that. So this one I only have a couple for, but where are some places that would be sources for stormwater runoff to carry oil and gas products to our waterways?
Andrea added parking lots.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty much parking lots and roads. Yeah. But like I showed, you may have seen in that picture earlier, it's, definitely something that if you're in a big parking lot, like say the Meyer parking lot in a rainstorm, you or when there's snow is melting, you might start seeing some sheen where somebody's car or vehicle is leaking some oil or gas onto that parking lot. So, okay, great. Well, thanks everybody for participating in those kind of interactive slides. And I hope it makes makes things a little less boring when we do that. So moving on, going back to the watershed boundaries. So watersheds are delineated by USGS using a nationwide system that divides the country into regions, subregions, basins, subbasins, watersheds, and subwatersheds. So as the watershed gets smaller, the hydrologic unit code, or what we call them HUCs for short, the digits assigned to that watershed increase. So the smaller the watershed, the larger the number. You may recall earlier on in the presentation that I showed a map with the boundary of the larger Manistee River watershed outlined. So this graphic, some of you may recognize, I took it out of the Little Manistee watershed plan. So the larger Manistee River watershed is shaded in the dark green. And that is what it has been assigned. That's a watershed that's assigned an 8-digit HUC. And the Little Manistee River watershed is outlined in red towards the bottom of the dark green watershed, and that is a HUC 8 subbasin. Or I'm sorry, the Manistee River is a HUC 8 subbasin. The Little Manistee River is a HUC 10 watershed, and that's outlined in red here. And then kind of zooming in on that, these other shaded little sub-watersheds are HUC 12 watersheds that are located within the HUC 10 Little Manistee River watershed. So in general, EGLE's non-point source program recommends that watershed management plans be developed for a HUC 10 watershed. However, this can vary depending on the watershed. So if a HUC 10 watershed is highly populated, highly impaired, or otherwise complex, it may be more appropriate to plan at the HUC 12 or multiple HUC 12 level. So for example, let's say Little Manistee's HUC 10 was vastly different, maybe super highly populated on the west side of the watershed. Maybe you would just do a plan to address the 2 most western HUC 12 watersheds as an example. But if a watershed is not very populated or has a fairly homogeneous land use throughout and few or no impairments, perhaps a larger scale HUC 8 sub-basin scale would be appropriate. Lake-focused plans might include only the watershed or watersheds surrounding the lake. And some watershed boundaries can start getting a bit complicated when you are looking at Great Lakes frontal watershed. In Manistee County specifically, the Portage Lake watershed plan covers a HUC 12 sub-watershed, while the Little Manistee River and Bear Lake plans cover HUC 10 watershed. And again, in general, the non-point source program recommends plans covering a HUC 10 watershed. I will say that when you're trying to figure out your watershed boundaries, we are certainly available to help you with determining that. So back to the major steps of developing a watershed plan. Now that you've built your partnerships and characterized the watershed, let's pretend that you also went ahead and set your goals and identified solutions and developed your implementation program. So now what? Well, now you need to submit your plan to EGLE, specifically me, if you're in the Cadillac or Gaylor district, for approval. On this slide, I show the cover pages of a couple of resources or guidance documents that are available to help you with developing the watershed plan. I do believe that Renee at the Manistee Conservation District has received some hard copies of one of these manuals. I think it's the one on the left, the EPA manual. I tend to refer folks to the EPA quick guide that's available online as a starting point because it's more concise to help you get started. So there's state of Michigan Clean Michigan Initiative or CMI requirements for what has to be included in the plan. And then there are also EPA 319 program requirements. We call that the 9 elements to be included in a plan. Review of the plan begins with the district staff person like me. Often I get some help at some point in time from our watershed coordinator who's in the non-point source unit in Lansing. Once the district and unit staff agree that the plan is ready for both state and federal approval, the plan is then sent to EPA for review. Once the plan is approved by both EGLE and EPA, then implementation funding from EPA and EGLE, both through the CMI and the 319 programs, may then be applied for implementation. So within the plan, you will have developed an implementation plan that or program that prioritizes actions, ties those actions back to goals and objectives of the plan, lays out the details for each action or task, such as cost, potential partners, potential funding sources, and milestones for monitoring progress. So I just took a screenshot of a couple of things from a plan that I recently worked on and was recently approved, just so you can kind of see some of the things that like the prioritization on the left, and then the different tasks and some costs and potential partners and whatnot. So now comes the fun part, I think, which is implementing the plan. So I'm going to just go through a few common projects that we see receive implementation funding. So one that we see a lot of includes replacement of road stream crossing. This one is on the east branch of the Maple River in Emmett County. On the left side, show two undersized culverts, and they were replaced by a timber bridge that you see on the right-hand side there. This project is pretty recent. It was done at the Mire in Traverse City. This is a stormwater infiltration basin project. So if you go to the Mire, you will not see this. It is now covered up by the newly resurfaced parking lot. But what this does is intercepts and infiltrates stormwater into the ground before it can make it to the adjacent water body. Another one that some people don't even really realize this is part of implementation involves placing permanent conservation easements on land that's identified as a priority for protection in the watershed plan. And this project shown here protected 192 acres of land in Antrim County. That includes almost 1,000 feet of frontage along Lake Skagamog and 1,400 feet of frontage along a tributary to the lake. And lastly, this is another project in Traverse City to replace two undersized and dilapidated pedestrian crossings on Kids Creek, which is a tributary to the Boardman River, with freestanding pedestrian bridges. So at some point during this presentation, or probably at least by now, you've wondered who's going to pay for all of this. To develop a watershed plan, common funding sources include EPA and EGLE, private sources, or a combination of both. Much of the support will likely be in kind from partners, including EGLE, such as providing data, maps, access to aerial imagery, help with certain inventories, and perhaps matching funds to use for certain grant applications. For implementing the watershed plans, once the plan has been approved by EGLE and EPA, the plan is then eligible for implementation funding through the CMI and/or 319 programs. In talking with watershed managers throughout my region, however, I have found that they fund projects really through a variety of sources. Some of these include private or community foundations, donations, or other state and federal sources, such as the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation's Sustain Our Great Lakes program. Or if you like acronyms, I think we call that the NIFWIF SOGO program. Another one is EPA's Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, Michigan DNR's Fisheries Habitat Program, the U.S. Forest Service, and EGLE's Coastal Management Program. In-kind support of implementation projects also commonly comes from local road commissions, lake associations, angler groups, or friends groups. And while developing and implementing a watershed plan can be complex, there's often a lot of support surrounding these efforts. So now you went through all of the steps successfully of watershed planning, but how often should this be done? If you don't have a watershed plan at all, a new plan should be developed as soon as possible. Although the process is complex, it can start with small steps to help gain momentum and support. Existing plans should be updated around every 10 years so that the plan keeps up with current issues and progress from implementing the previous plan. And then technical updates can be made as needed when significant progress is made to implement a plan and or when significant changes occur within the watershed. So with that, I want to thank you all for your time and interest in this topic, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if we have some time.
Yeah, so we can open it up to questions now. There's probably a few.
I think I'll stop sharing, but
Okay.
I don't know how to do that. Oh, here, stop sharing. Okay. I warned Chelsea that I usually make presentations on Teams. This is I think I did pretty good for my first Zoom presentation. If
You did.
So thank you.
Yeah.
And of course, if you need I think most everybody has my contact information or knows how to get it, but I certainly can share that again if needed. So.
All right. Questions?
You're welcome, Renee. Renee, maybe you can share with us which guide that my coworker Bob in Lansing sent to you guys that you have available to hand out.
It is the large EPA one.
Okay.
I'm assuming the smaller quick start guide that you were referring to is somewhere digitally.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can try to find that and put it in the chat.
Oh, perfect.
I like it. It's a good starting point. I think that very thorough manual is good, but if folks are just trying to get started on like looking at what it all, you know, entails, I think the quick guide is really helpful. So yeah, I'll try to find the link to that.
Do you know or have any insights into future funding that might support like watershed coordinators for watershed groups coming down the pike, or any discussion of that? I think that's one of our big deficits here in the conservation district, is working on a position to try and help some of that. But as you know, there's so much work to all the watersheds. I was just wondering, with all that money and all this talk and the climate healthy plan, if you see that happening.
You know, that the Watershed Council Support Grant that we have offered the last 3 years, and hopefully will continue offering, does allow to help with some capacity building, but it's not really, and it's, I will say, hard to find funding for capacity building, but it's also hard to find funding for ongoing position support, other than just applying for grants for different projects and including, you know, your salary and fringes in there. But going back to one of the reasons why I think it's important to develop a watershed plan, which is building support, is the more people that are involved in the watershed planning and know the importance of it, the more support you can get for efforts for long-term funding. So say, like, I know you guys successfully passed a millage, you know, things like that, where you get the community to support efforts that would help you with more long-term funding. So, you know, I can't think of any other sources, you know, other than just your various grants, but, you know, the capacity building, I think, is good with the Watershed Council Support Grant to kind of get things up and running. But what we do really want to see in those is, you know, how are you going to use that funding to kind of build a more sustainable either program or position or whatever it might be. So kind of leveraging funding.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, I think for now I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. So thanks for watching, YouTube.